Am I on mute?
A very warm welcome to all those who are here today on the next episode of webinar LC Live. Today we have two guests who don't really need any introduction, very familiar to all of us. Amman Madan is faculty at Azim Premji University and anchors an interest group for dialogue, fraternity, and justice, and works on how to learn better ways in dealing with interpersonal and social conflicts. Welcome, Amman. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you,
Chandrika
Prem.
Murli Chandrika Muralidhar is also faculty at Azim Premji University. Her interests lie in science and science education, exploring pedagogies in science and assessment approaches, and writing articles on science education, especially meant for practitioners. Both of you, very, very warm welcome. Thank you for being with us. And the topic is so interesting, accepting differences, building fraternity. As you know, LC is a theme based magazine, and the theme for the last issue was nurturing well being in schools. And Aman has written a very personal piece on how we can bring down the walls and become more inclusive. Over to both of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Prema. And thank you, Aman, for participating in our webinar for the learning curve. And I think it was a uh, what should I say, a very interesting experience for me to read this piece that you have written. And to think of something as important and as relevant as fraternity in the classroom, and wherein you speak about, creating situations where fraternity can be uh, nurtured in the classroom. You also speak about different kinds of approaches that can be implemented in the classroom for nurturing fraternity, and also how the subjects, the school subjects in the classroom can uh, you know uh, be very good resources for overcoming different kinds of prejudices. I would start off with my first question to you. Is you have mentioned in the article about creating creation of a feeling of fraternity. So how do we understand this particular term, creation of a feeling of fraternity?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Thank you, Chandrika. Yeah, it's a feeling, and that has to be emphasized. Uh, See, the idea of fraternity itself is a very old idea. It has had a number of different names in different times. The term fraternity really becomes famous with the French Revolution, where people are trying to break out of older ways of thinking and saying, let's create a new world where everybody is free and everybody can think for themselves. At the heart of it, they talk of three principles: liberty, equality, fraternity. So that's where it really becomes popular. And in recent years, fraternity has become unpopular. I was looking for entries on it in various encyclopedias, and I couldn't find it. Even on Wikipedia, you won't find an entry on fraternity in the sense that we are talking about. So yes, we should talk about what do we mean by fraternity, and there are a number of people talking about it nowadays. This idea of fraternity comes from the idea of feeling part of a family. Fraternity itself is has a slightly patriarchal thing. It's about feeling to be part of a group of brothers, really. But I think we can move away from that kind of sense, and we can talk about it as feeling part of one family. And this feeling is really important because, and feelings are particularly important because whatever kind of world we want to create, if you want to create a world of justice, if you want to create a world where people are fair to each other, if you want to create a world which is democratic, where we listen to the voices of people, why should I listen to the voices of people? Why should I listen to somebody else's voice? Why should I not do just what I want? I will only do it when I feel for them. And when I feel that they are part of me, when I feel that they are part of my family. So fraternity actually becomes a very important feeling. It's a feeling that these are mine, these are my people. They are not they are not enemies. They are not somebody I look down upon. They are not somebody who I think is very different. People may be very different and still be part of the family. So fraternity is a feeling. It's a concept. It has political implications. It has legal implications. But it's fundamentally when we're talking about building fraternity, we're talking about building a feeling where where there are emotions in it, and there are parts of it which are conceptual, cognitive. I can give a name to it, and there's a part of it which I can't give a name to. I just feel. So and this is if I have this feeling, it becomes possible to work with someone. If I have a neighbor, if I have another community, it's possible to work with them. It's possible to do things with them because we feel for each other. We are all more or less one. We are different, but we are one. This idea in itself, we have to cultivate feelings, is a very important idea. As you know, and I mean, you have also, I think, written about it somewhere that uh, paying attention to feelings and emotions in education and in our culture is very important, as many people say, because ultimately it's these feelings which motivate us to do something.
Right. Okay. Um, mm, when we speak about a classroom scenario, and uh, something which is very evident in our classrooms is this sense of competition, right? And just not in our classrooms, even at homes, there's competition between siblings, and on the sports field, you have competition, and you have the most dreaded competition, which is of marks, which is of grades. And you've mentioned that competition is something that leads to fear and distrust. Right? So, how can we address this whole aspect of fear and distrust creeping into the minds of children when we speak about competition?
Yeah. Uh, when I was talking about competition in my article and uh, when we talk about in the context of fraternity, one idea behind that is, and on which there's a lot of evidence, is that when do communities begin to distrust each other? When do children begin to distrust each other? And when do communities begin to distrust each other? When do the communities begin to build hatred, negative feelings, animosity with each other? And that can come into the classroom. And among students also, that's what happens. At the heart of it, there may be some, of course, between individuals, there may be some interpersonal thing. But most classically, most typically, between communities, this happens when communities are competing, that term again, competing. And they're competing for some kind of scarce resource, which may be a material resource, or it may be status, it may be respect. Like children competing not for a material resource, but for I am number one. Uh, when it's a situation where the social structure, the environment is such, only some can have and others will lose. It's a win-lose game. Now, that is a typical situation when these ideas and these emotions of hatred and distrust begin to emerge. So there's a lot of work in anthropology, sociology, history, which says that when do communities hate each other? When children begin to dislike each other?
Right.
A more very common thing is when they are in a relationship of competition for scarce respect. Only some can be respected, others cannot be respected. Or resources or power. And in this, of course, the place of between communities, the place of leaders can be very important. Leaders who are instigating the whole thing, saying that the more you hate others, the more I will become important to you, and this is my way of becoming a great leader. So people can instigate this. It may be there in the real conditions. It may be promoted also by people, and it can be promoted by teachers also. The more you people compete with each other, the
Right.
more I become important. But ultimately, it's very important to note that, of course, competition is there, and competition is not always a bad thing. It's a good. It can help me to introspect and become better, provided it's not a competition which is a win-lose game. If it's a competition in which we can even collaborate and become better, and I try to talk about that later. I try to talk about that briefly in my article also. When it's collaborative work, people seem to improve and people seem to create better relationships. But when I win only when I make you lose, you know, that is the common root of hatred. And this is what we have to work against. If I want relationships to improve, how do I move it from a situation of competition into one of cooperation, both in communities as well as between individuals in the classroom?
Right. Yes, yeah. I mean, your video just froze, so I was thinking you're still continuing to speak. So, Aman, since you spoke about cooperation, uh, you know, I also wanted to, uh, you know, speak about this aspect of teachers in classrooms where they need to form groups, you know, and many a times practitioners are they find it challenging to form balanced groups. All right, and you have mentioned two people's work, the Canadian economist and the person's work in the article about this. So could you shed a little bit of light on that, about what
Yeah,
goes into forming maybe a balanced group? I wouldn't say a good group, but a
huh.
balanced group for cooperative learning to
Yeah,
happen.
right. Yeah. So, uh, as you are pointing to, see, the classroom is a very special space for us to create better relationships between individuals as well as communities. That is because there may be competition between the communities outside, which may be over resources. Somebody has land, somebody doesn't have land. So one group actually dominates the other and forces the other one to work for it. There may be these kind of things outside. But the school, in many places, not everywhere, but in many places, is a forum where you have children of very different backgrounds and you can bring them in over here. And now the teacher can control that space. The teachers, school authorities, curriculum makers can control that space and make sure that the problems of the outside world don't come in way. And instead, we can create the opposite thing. We can create conditions here which can actually push out and balance out the problems of the outside world. And that's this question of cooperative learning, and we talked about that also. Now, what can I do inside the classroom? And that's the question of how can I get children to form groups of more or less equals to do this. Um, but first, why do we want to create groups of equals? So there is a lot of work in social psychology which says that when you put children together in groups to do things, we want them to be cooperating, because that's when they cooperate is when tensions begin to go down. When they cooperate is when gets built, when they begin to like each other. But to even cooperate, if they are of very different uh, 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 levels of ability, or if they are bringing to the table something which are highly, one group is bringing something which is highly respected and is looking down on the other group, that also doesn't work. So as you very nicely put it, that how do we bring them together so that they are more or less equals. That's so that bringing them together as equals is crucial. Now, what do I look for when I try to build those equal groups? And the classroom is very diverse. As you know, that you'll have some students, for example, in a maths classroom, some students who have people teaching them maths at home, some children who have nobody to teach them maths at home. So some children will be very skilled because they are getting a lot of practice at home. And some children will not be getting any exposure to maths at home. And in the classroom, they're all there. When I try to create cooperative groups over here, I can't mix people of very different abilities. Now, this is an important thing in building groups for creating cooperative activities. I need to actually find some way in which I have groups where they are feeling they can respect each other. Now, how do I do that? One way of doing that is I have done some pre-testing and I know who's where in maths. And I make groups in the class of students who are more or less of similar levels of ability in maths, but are of different social backgrounds. That's the kind of group I'm looking at. So it may be at the high end, it may be at the middle end, it may be at the low end. That's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is to think what are the different abilities I need to be able to solve an issue. So maybe I can bring in students with carrying different abilities
Right.
and put them together. So somebody does this, somebody does that, somebody does another thing. That kind of group can also work. Yes, it's difficult, and yet it has tremendous payoffs. It's not that difficult also. I mean, once the teacher has done some pre-test, early testing to see how much where people are standing, it's possible to do this. If, of course, the class is very large, then it is a problem. If I have a class of 100 students, in any case, I can't make groups. So it's very difficult. But if it's a class of 20, 25, 40 even, up to 40, it becomes a little more difficult around 40, but it's possible to do. So that getting a sense of students' different abilities relevant to the task involved. The paper, for example, I had mentioned that the paper by Matt Lowery puts children of different castes together into mixed groups. For him, the most important thing was how good are they in cricket? Because the whole task was around playing cricket. So he was looking at how good are they in cricket. Anybody who's above a certain level, he puts into a particular group. Okay. So just playing cricket. It need not be match, it may be playing cricket. It may not be people who have a lot of money. Not necessarily. It's what is the most relevant and prestigious ability for the task at hand. I look at it over here.
And I think when you spoke about sometimes challenges for this, it could also help if there is a certain structure to it, and especially if you have somebody, somebody who can support you in doing this systematically and sustainably,
That's
because because these kind of situations in a classroom will need to be created with a lot of care, right?
very true. Very
Yeah.
true.
So
Though my belief is that it gets better with practice. It
right,
gets better with training. If somebody, for example, does a 2-day workshop for me on how do I do cooperative learning in classes,
right, right,
helps me with a bit of orientation and practice. It begins to fall in place very quickly.
right. So
Yeah, but
Aman,
sorry, you were saying something.
yeah, I'll just pause here because we have a question. Uh,
Right.
I could read the question for you. It's from Kritika. She says, could you please share your ideas on acceptance in terms of emotion and also how to balance it? Uh, Maybe throw some seed of thoughts on the processes of unlearning and relearning towards inclusiveness.
Yeah. So, uh, on acceptance, say that's a very important thing. Acceptance, tolerance, accepting people who are different and yet accepting them. Now, acceptance is, in terms of emotions, it's a positive feeling towards people, even though they are different. And it's different from, this feeling is different from, say, fear of people or fear, or which is often, very often, at the heart of a lot of things. At the heart of a lot of prejudice, one of the surprises for me has been how common fear is. People are scared of other people, and people are scared of people who are different, and that's what leads to a lot of things. So it's a very different feeling from being scared of people, or from wanting to show other people, no, you're inferior. I have to be on top. I have to assert I am the right person. You're inferior. That's another kind of approach, which is both feelings and cognitive. How do I move from that into both a feeling and a conceptual uh, position, a cognition that this is all right, and it is. I'm fine with it. I'm positive with it. I may not be in love with it, but I'm positive to it. This is the shift one is trying to move towards, and there's a lot of many things can be done. One of those things is like building uh, cooperative learning groups. And there's a lot of work around this, around from contact theory and from many other things. But
Yes.
building cooperative learning groups at the classroom, doing a lot of things through cooperative learning groups. Just the fact that we are together, that experience of being together, having common goals, trying to find some answers to things which I also care for, you also care for, and I'm valuing your contribution. That's the thing. I am making important contributions, and the other person is also making valuable contributions. This
Right.
seems to shift our feelings. And my initial, people will come into these groups initially with some apprehensions, a bit of tension. It's a different person with me, another caste, another religion, another gender, a gender I don't even understand. They will come with apprehension, and slowly one finds that these feelings begin to shift, and then their concepts also begin to shift with this. So this is one of the situations, creating situations of where they are working together as equals, of relatively equal status with common goals, with sharing a common goal, finding that they want to and they need to cooperate with each other. That's one direction. But there are a number of other things which people have done for this. Another of the things is, for example, what do I do if I don't have a person from another caste in my classroom? And that's a big problem in India. That as schools are becoming privatized, the caste and class characters of schools are, layers are forming. You find, for example, in a school which charges a very high fees, you have a relatively similar kind of people in that. So this is a problem. How do I get people from other communities into this over here who don't have that kind of money? Then we try other things, and many things work. For example, just the act of telling stories, showing films, reading storybooks, which show members of other social groups in a positive light.
Right.
And this also people have observed that in maths and science, doing activities which show other groups in positive lights. This also starts to affect feelings. Because how are those feelings created in the first place? They're created through experiences.
Yeah.
When we create other kinds of experiences which we can in the classroom because we control the classroom, we can do a lot over here. Then those feelings again now begin to shift in another direction over here. So there's a lot which can be done, and building, for example, narratives, creating situations for cooperative learning, uh, 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 getting uh, uh, high status individuals to come and show that we look at the other community in a different way also helps a lot. So, for example, suppose I do not forgive me. I'm not a cricket person, but who's the cricket? See somebody like Virat Kohli were to come and say that please don't discriminate against that community, or don't discriminate against people who think of themselves as that gender. I mean, Virat Kohli is saying that. So, getting people of high status, who in my view are high status, them coming and exemplifying other positions related to different social groups also shifts our feelings. So there are a number of such things which people have listed, which do have an impact upon uh, to what degree do I accept others? And is my relationship, is my way of thinking about others conceptually, is my way of feeling for others one of distaste or disgust or fear or contempt? Or is my feeling one of, yeah, nice people, fine, I like them. I may not love them. If I love them, of course, that's wonderful. But they're nice. These are the things which shape these feelings. There's much more, of course. I'm giving a very simple,
Right.
simplified picture. There's much more.
Right. So, when we are talking about feelings, we are talking about, there's one particular aspect wherein you've spoken about intertwining of classifications and feelings and attitudes. It's the overlapping of these things. So what, according to you, what would be the various ways in which we could change the way in which people make their classifications? Because you've given this elaborate answer, and you spoke about the feelings aspect of it. So what are the, and you also said that different ways of stories showing a particular community or a particular gender in a positive light could be one of the ways. um, what could be the other ways in which this the intertwining of classification and feelings could be
Yeah,
changed?
yeah. So it took me a while uh, to realize that actually this intertwining business. We have concepts. There's a cognitive dimension to how we think about other communities, other genders, to various social groups. There's a cognitive thing, and this is intertwined with feelings, with my emotions also, and that is intertwined with what I do, with how I act. These three things go together: cognition, affect, and practice. They are all intertwined actually. So, for example, I find uh, what many of us have seen, many of us perhaps have done it ourselves, that if I were to see at my door a man standing who's wearing the dress of a very poor man, now I will think twice about opening my door. That person is knocking on my door. Will I open my door? That's my practice. We find that my brain is processing conceptually clothing. I'm looking at dress. I'm looking at expressions. I'm looking at age. I'm looking at gender. And with that, feelings are coming up. I may have a feeling of fear. Many of us are taught or we learn to build these feelings of fearfulness when we see people of a particular social group.
Right.
And with that, certain actions are done. These are all interconnected. And there are patterns to that. Even to the extent of vomiting, you will find that people may even vomit on seeing certain things because are they born like that? No. But uh, my entire experiences of how do I conceptually see something is connected so much with my stomach, that I can vomit also. So all these are interconnected. And the challenge is to shift all of these, together. This may take many forms. Some of them I've just mentioned. But it may also mean, for example, uh, uh, taking children, for example, to walks of around different places of worship. For example, take children to a gurdwara, take children to a mosque, to a masjid, to a mandir, to a church. Periodically taking them over there and having a nice person over there who comes and tells them what is all this about, what is happening, what are the different parts, what do we do. Have somebody come and explain that. And we'll find that the very idea that I don't go into other people's places of worship, I don't even, I stay away from other people's places of worship, that feeling begins to shift. What we are actually we want to do is to transform all these three. My conceptual understanding, for example, of other religions, and the feelings I have for other religions, and also the my practices, that I don't go there. I stay away. I stay away from that. We have to transform all these three. This is what we are trying to look for towards doing.
Right. So when we there's also another aspect that you've spoken about, which is emphasizing identities. Emphasizing identities helps in changing the classifications made by people. Just kind of
Yeah,
talks to what we've been speaking about till now.
yeah, yeah. So this is a counterintuitive thing, and this is also something on which there's a fair amount of research which is supporting this. But let me explain what I mean. The habitual thing, which is also what I used to think earlier, was don't talk about identities. If you don't talk about identities, things will become all right. Is how we used to think. That don't talk about caste, don't talk about gender, don't talk about religion, and people will forget all about it. We used to think like that. But uh, there's a lot of research, there's a lot of people's experiences, experiments, a lot of what activists have been saying that it doesn't work. By ignoring identities, if as a teacher, if I ignore identities, will those identities go away? They don't go away. It's just that I have silenced myself from talking about it. There are there are many things, but I'll just talk of two ways in which actually bringing identity into my classroom and into my thinking as a teacher helps. One is that uh, I consciously need to identify as a teacher which are the social groups in my class and which are the ones which are the silenced social groups. So, of course, if my class is completely homogeneous, then I will only probably find that it's the girls, for example, who are the silent social groups. For example, one of my research colleagues, Ria Dominic, has been studying at a private school, and she's finding that it's the boys who talk a lot. She's teaching grade 9. She was teaching grade 9. For any issue, the girls hardly speak in the class, the boys are the ones who talk. Who is the silenced social group in a classroom? So I cannot be identity blind. I have to start asking who is quiet. And then I have to start finding ways of supporting them, empowering them to be able to speak. In this case, it was the girls. There may be situations where it is people from the less powerful jatis who are the silenced ones. Or it may be that one or two people of a minority religion in that area. In that area, there may be a particular minority religion. Most of the people in that area are from another religion. There may be a small number from another religion who are very quiet in the class. So who's quiet? So I can't ignore identities. They are there. And I have to actually identify them if I want to empower them and get them to start speaking. That's one dimension why I can't forget identities. The other reason to not do this is, and this is on the basis of studies by people like Francis Abu and others who tried to look at how do you overcome prejudices. They took, for example, stories which talked about, say, a very interesting, nice character of a social group against which I am holding a prejudice. Now, if there's a story, for example, of say, for example, a girl who's doing something very brave, very courageous, and doing things like that, one would expect that if all the children in my class read it, their thoughts about girls change. Their feelings, their concepts that girls cannot be brave and doing courageous things. That will change. But it does not always change. It changes. It does not change, for example, in situations where it's only the name of the character is the name of a girl. But when that story is not only having the name of the character as being a girl, but being a girl is highlighted, that's when that begins to change. When
Right.
people are talking, oh, you are a girl, you can't be doing this, she's pushing back on that, or the story is saying that she's doing a number of things which are identified with being a girl, and she's brave and courageous. That's when it begins to change. Otherwise, what children do is they kind of bracket out the name,
Yes.
and so the
Yes.
effect, the effect of that story just doesn't appear. So this is another reason to pay attention to identity. If I'm using a story with the idea that through this some prejudices will shift, then highlighting that identity seems to be necessary. Earlier we used to think it's not necessary. We used to write a story, say I just have the name like that is enough. No, it doesn't. So there's experimental work which has tested the two kinds of stories, and the first kind of story where only the name is different doesn't seem to result in any change, whereas the second kind does seem to make a difference.
Yes, and you've also mentioned about Dhruv's
Yeah,
the choice of storybooks, wherein
that's
usually it's the girl who's the lead character in the story, and
right.
she how she's breaking the stereotypes, and giving the students, the listeners, an example of that this is not, it's not a mold in which a girl needs to be, but this is also something else that a girl could do, right? So Aman, we'll take a pause before we move to the last segment of our discussion. We have two questions. What we could do was we could probably take one question now and complete our discussion and come back to the second question. So we have a question from Krishna Srivalli. Uh, she says, the article speaks of teaching subjects through a lens of fraternity that would require an added effort on behalf of the teachers. Is there a way that could be done slightly more effortlessly?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, this is a very important issue. When teachers already are overworked, or under so much pressure, we want them to actually do things. Give me a second, I forgot to put this on mute. So this is a really important issue. The uh, See, if we want teachers to be superheroes, they are not. They can't be superheroes. I'm just struggling to manage things, and it's not going to happen. And then we'll keep blaming teachers only. It's teachers' fault. Why are they not doing this? But it's not practical. What we have to do, and so the effort has to be put in. Of course, little bit of effort by teachers, but a lot of effort has to be put in by people who are supporting teachers. How do we? What kind of workshops do we do? What kind of materials do we create? What kind of other resources do we create that the teachers can learn to do these things, and it doesn't burden them too much? There are many things which can be done, and at the heart of it is people supporting them.
Right.
Somebody coming in and helping them, or also I mean, articles like the one I've written are also things like that. If we have a number of small things which are giving inputs, not to expect that teachers are going to suddenly take a somersault and do something completely
Right.
dramatic.
Right.
It's not going to happen.
Mm.
But can we do small, small things?
Yes.
Can we do that? A lot of that is actually doable, and which is, as I said, this is something for those of us who work with teachers need to think about hard. What can we do to support them that they can do it without killing themselves in the process?
Right. Avan, you're frozen. Acha,
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah. Can you hear
yeah,
me?
yeah. Aman, we have two more questions, but we'll finish
Right.
small little part that is left for our discussion.
Right.
This is
Yeah.
something which you already mentioned, in the passing during your conversation, is about the uh, curriculum,
Right.
you know, and you've also said in your article that the curriculum needs to focus on resisting the hatred and fear. And there has been a considerable amount of work which has been done in the social science curriculum, and you've given examples of biology, and can we discuss a little bit more about this?
Right. Yeah. So the curriculum and the syllabus. Once I start thinking that through my existing syllabus, how can I improve these relationships? Then for syllabus designers, this is a very exciting question, and I was thinking that in the curriculum and the syllabus makers, curriculum designers, in many parts of India and in many parts of the world, have done very interesting and good things in this. One of the examples is, for example, can we talk about caste? Now, uh, I've also looked at social studies textbooks from many boards in India. Most social studies textbooks are embarrassed to talk about caste and they don't want to talk about caste.
Right.
It's also not part of the teacher training. So they kind of say, "Okay, how earlier there used to be something, now it's all gone," which is partly true, but it's not fully true. It's not fully gone. And it keeps surfacing in surprising ways and in very hurtful ways.
Yes.
And the people who are experiencing it, they feel deeply hurt and traumatized by it. Now, so I need to talk about it. What can be models of talking about it? And it has to be, by the way, it's an important thing. In the light of what you just said about teachers, it has to be a curricular intervention. It also has to be a teacher education intervention. I can put it in the curriculum, but if I don't prepare teachers, it's not going to work. But in many parts of the world, people have done this. In the US, for example, talking about race is now an established part of the curriculum. 50 years ago, it was not. But in 50 years, we've seen a big shift. Talking about race, talking about patriarchy is an established part of the school curriculum. And it's part of teacher education. Teachers are trained as to how to talk about this.
Right.
In India, one of the few exceptions of textbooks coming out being in the curriculum and textbooks coming out talking about caste is the NCRT textbooks, the social political life, 6th, 7th, 8th, and even going up to ninth and 10th in NCRT textbooks in social science, they talk about caste. And they acknowledge that caste exists. They talk about some of the ways in which people have experienced caste and casteism. It's a very refreshing kind of thing to see in those textbooks. The challenge is for the teacher now how to talk about it. And teacher training has unfortunately lagged over. So teachers feel lost. How do I teach this? And what do I do? It is possible for teachers to also talk about it. But they have to be oriented a little bit. They have to themselves know a little bit about the caste system. And they need to be shown there are ways of teaching it which transforms how children see it without getting somebody to come and beat you up. That's the other fear which teachers have. That if we
Yes.
talk about caste, people will come and attack us, people will come and fight
Yeah.
with us.
Yeah.
That also one has to find ways of talking about it. In which, again, fraternity, by the way, comes to a rescue. Whenever one talks about caste or other things, one of the basic principles which I have seen working, and many people have said they see working, when I'm talking about some terrible things, if I'm able to talk about in a way which is showing that I care, not only for those who are being hurt by that, by the caste system, but I also care for those who are doing the hurting. So long as I'm able to show that I'm feeling that this is a bad thing, it's very unfortunate it is happening. And I don't think the people who are doing the bad things are all very bad people. We are all caught in history, we are trapped in a social structure. And yet this is happening. This kind of a way is acceptable. And it does change people. So fraternity, promoting feelings of care, promoting feelings of, in the children, feeling that we were doing something, we need to change and we need to become, we need to care for people.
Right.
Making love and care at the heart of the entire conversation is one of the ways in which people don't come and fight with you. They may not be happy at what you're doing in the classroom, but they don't usually come and fight. There
Right.
can be many other ways, and these are all things which we have to take together. We have to learn from the experiments of teachers who have done it well. We have to put it together and make that part of teacher education. Hiding from it and saying it, oh, it never existed, or it was something in the past not happening, doesn't help. It's there,
Yeah.
and this is what we have to change, because otherwise our children also growing up believing it. They may not even be conscious of it, and yet they may have those prejudices. So putting it on the table, finding ways of talking about it, finding ways of talking about it in a respectful and caring way is the direction we have to take, which calls for curricular interventions, which means
Yeah.
it should be in the syllabus.
Right.
And it also calls for preparing teachers. How do I deal with it? Teachers are scared. Or teachers are uncomfortable because they themselves don't understand the caste system.
Right.
Similar things actually have to be said about teaching about gender and patriarchy and many other things also.
Okay. So, Aman, I do have one more question for you, but I think we will take the questions which have been asked. We have two questions. We'll take up the first question by Vaibhav. He says, his question is a lot towards building fraternity, trust, and cooperation comes from parents and the community in which a learner lives in. How do we deal with such factors?
Yeah, that is another important question. See, uh, one basic thing we must keep in mind that schools are only one force in society. A lot of prejudice, a lot of discrimination, inequality, oppression comes from the social structure.
Right.
So, can schools solve the whole problem? No, they can't solve the whole problem. Because, for example, take example of patriarchy, where people in societies which think women, there's large parts of India, we are unfortunately we still thinks that women are inferior beings. They don't deserve as much respect as men. They're not even as sensitive and as thoughtful as men are. So I pay attention to what men think. I don't pay attention to what women think.
Right.
Now, how will this? What does this rest upon? What are its social roots? I have to change those social roots. I can do a lot in the school, but I also have to change those social roots. And those social roots, I won't go into detail, but just one of the social roots, for example, is, are the women in a society, do they have control over high status resources? So, for example, are they making as much money as men? That seems to be a very important, one of the important roots for the differences in how men and women are treated and how we feel. So that's a social root. We can do something about that in schools, but we can't fully solve that. That has to be solved. A lot of that solution has to come outside also. So there's a lot which has to be done outside schools. And yet there's also a lot which we can do inside schools.
Hmm.
What we can do inside schools is, for example, I can change attitudes, I can change some feelings, I can change many concepts. I can do a lot in my classroom to affect this. Will this completely take care of the problem of patriarchy? No, it won't, until that problem is solved.
Right.
These are different things pushing against each other. So the school is a place where we have some autonomy from the rest of society, not full. We have some autonomy, and we can do a lot of things over here. And in that, of course, as this questioner is also thinking, that that society will come and push back at us also. Which is why, if one is to do this properly, and one wants to be safe while doing it, many of my students who try to do this, my friends who have tried to do this, it works best when one does not try to do it only alone, but one has talked to the head teacher, one has talked to the principal, and said, look, we are doing this, and this is where we are going, and they're all supporting it. So, for example, one of our very bright students at one point, Vinay, he was telling me how he was talking about multiple genders in the classroom. And before that, before he did that, he had had a long talk with his principal. The principal said, yeah, this is an important thing to talk about. We should talk about this. So the next day after teaching this, when some parents came to the school and said, what is your teacher telling our students? Those parents went to the principal. And the principal knew that this is happening, and the principal thought it was a good thing to do. And the principal stood up for it. And the parents also kind of, all right, okay, all right, we live with it. So if he hadn't had this conversation, if Vinay hadn't had this conversation with the principal, he would have been in deep trouble. So think of it as building counter forces to those social forces, which means I do it. I also have support from my colleagues. I build support from my principal. I put in all that effort also, or somebody else has to put in that effort. Teacher educators, other people working with schools help in creating that larger support system. Again, to think of this as a heroic teacher fighting against the whole world is not being fair to the teacher. We have to create these entire ecosystems of support for these things. And that's where we can begin to do. And with a clear thought that this will make a lot of difference, it will not fully solve. Because until the rest of the social structure also changes, it is not going to fully go away. But still, schools are important. And schools create those feelings. It's the young people growing up in schools who think of men and women in a different way, who don't think of women in an objectified, sexist way, who think of women as human beings. Those are the young people who will tomorrow go out and do more good work. So it's worth it.
Right. So, Aman, there's one more question by Rishi Raj, which is very similar to the question that I was wanting to ask you. So, we will probably take that question. He says, can you please share some ways to build fraternity and foster a sense of unity and belonging among students from diverse backgrounds?
Yeah. So, Rishi, I have given some more examples in my article. You can have a look at that. But just to put it simply, there are two major ways of doing this. Two major kinds. There are many ways, but there are two major kinds of ways. One is put the students together in situations through things like cooperative learning and other things, and playing games together, where they will discover that they actually need to cooperate with the other group to be able to do what they want to do. So when they are put together in situations where they have common goals, that seems to make a lot of difference in gradually reducing. It won't happen in one day, but it gradually begins to reduce the prejudices and fears. And plus, there are many other things which we do. We build narratives, we tell stories, we show films. We get leaders to come in and talk to them. We get them to go in and we go and familiarize them with people of other communities. These are many things which teachers can organize and which makes a difference to the kind of thing you and I both worried about.
Okay. So, you know, one suggestion that has come in the paper is about the youth contributing to building a culture of affection, building a culture of respect, dialogue, and a sense of equality. So in your experience, as a faculty at the university, how have you seen, because we work with very young children, we work with the youth of the country. So, how do you think you have been able to see this in your classrooms?
Yeah. I see things improving tremendously. For example, I teach in the master's programs over 2 years. One of the pleasures of being a teacher is to see, and in a university like ours, which is so conscious about getting in students from very diverse backgrounds. We have students from all over the country, and we have students from all kinds of social backgrounds, and we want even more diversity. We are still not satisfied. We feel that there are states from which we need many more students, and we also want students from very different backgrounds to come. Now, when we get them all together, remember the principle I was talking about, putting them together with common goals. It is a pleasure to see. It makes a lot of difference. It doesn't make it. It's. I don't want to say paint a rosy picture that everybody get transformed. No, not necessarily.
Yeah, yeah,
There are problems also. But I see every year I see a tremendous difference. I see within a few months I'm seeing students of different regions, different religions, different castes, different genders. They begin to bond, they begin to be friends, and they're working together. And this is why I keep saying to a lot of my friends who say that schools are terrible, colleges are terrible. Of course, there are a lot of problems in each of them. And yet, this is the hope in these institutions. People coming in from different backgrounds becoming friends. This is a wonderful thing, and we have to dig deeper into understanding why it works. Of course, sometimes it doesn't work. So why does sometimes it doesn't work? Why that? But this, I see this and I get tremendous hope that people can live together, people can be friends, people can respect each other, people's concepts, people's feelings, people's practices begin to shift. It's and I see that.
right. So, we do have a couple of minutes. I'll just take this last question from Kavaljeet. You have pertinently mentioned that private education itself has created a fraternity exclusively for upper class society. How can teachers who are also preferring jobs in these highly paid schools? That's it. I don't see the
Perhaps
question
the
as such.
sentence, perhaps something got left out in the title. Perhaps what was the so what can teachers do in such places where you have highly homogeneous classrooms, who are from very
Yes.
privileged background? What do you do? See, there we do where we can't have students of different backgrounds, but we can still tell stories. We can still show films. We can still bring in people to meet them who are not like them, and yet whom they feel, oh, these are such wonderful people. These are the things we still have to. We can still do. Is it as effective as actually being together for 2 years or 5 years with others? No, not as effective, but it still makes a difference. So there are still many things we can do. I can't have a physical diversity in my class, but I can create a virtual diversity in my mind, in my exposure, in the interactions I'm having. I can do that.
Correct. Correct.
And I
So,
can teach about this. In the syllabus, I can put this and talk about it. That you may not be experiencing casteism yourself, but
yes.
it's there.
Yeah, it is something that we cannot close our eyes to. Yeah, so yeah. So thank you so much, Aman, for emphasizing in your article about the importance of empathy uh, and to accept differences, to be how traditional biases and prejudices uh, should not come in the way. They do come in the way and limit the child's emotional growth, and to provide the child an opportunity and a platform to live life which is very inclusive for them and for others. So So, thank you so much for this interaction. And Prema, back to you.
It was such an interesting discussion. I'm sure the audience, and I think the audience found it very interesting too, because you've had so many questions this time. And the one thing that stood out for me, Aman, was how you talked about, the genuine respect you have to feel, and the understanding and genuine respect and understanding that you have to show people in order to let them know how you empathize with them and how you understand both parties. As you say, those who are doing the hurting as well as those who are getting hurt. That was one thing. And the other thing was how universities like ours actually engender and foster inclusivity and understanding. And a lot of times, as you said, uh, children or young people don't know about the others. So a lot of it is born out of ignorance also. So it's a very, very interesting discussion. Chandrika, thank you so much for those very thought provoking questions. And Aman, thank you so much for being there and talking us through this. So, thanks the audience also who have come here despite their busy schedules. And I invite you all at the same time on June 7th, the first Wednesday of June, for the next episode of LC Live. So, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chandrika.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Aman. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.